Verse 27, after 26 says the news spread throughout the land. As Jesus went from there, two blind men followed him, crying out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." When he entered the house, the blind men came up to him. And Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" And they said, "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes, saying, "It shall be done to you according to your faith." And their eyes were opened, and Jesus sternly warned them, "See that no one knows about this." But they went out, spread the news about him throughout the land. And as they were going, a mute, demon-possessed man was brought to him. After the demon was cast out, the mute man spoke, and the crowds were amazed and were saying, "Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel." But the Pharisees were saying, "He casts out demons by the ruler of the demons." And Jesus was going through all the cities and villages, teaching in the synagogues, and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. Seeing the people, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into the field." All right, good stuff. Good verses there, especially those last two. But you can see when you get the running start at those last two, where they fit in as far as a context, because we often just pull them out and quote them. But here Jesus is doing all this work, all these powerful things are happening, and he's recognizing that these are people without a shepherd. They are vulnerable. We need people to go and be laborers in this harvest. I mean, he's shown what can happen in the harvest that he is bringing about. But he needs laborers to go out into this harvest. All right, so starting in Matthew 9:27, we've already seen Jesus dealing with disease and disaster and demons and death. And now he's going to deal with darkness and dumbness. A blind man and a deaf man. Now, blindness was not uncommon. It was something that was pretty common. There's a lot of reasons for it. Somebody might get sick. They might be in unsanitary conditions where their eye gets infections and things. Sexually transmitted diseases was a problem. Sometimes women would give birth to a blind child because they had a disease like that, and the canal that the baby came through caused it to be infected and affect its eyes and things, so it'd be born blind. And then some people get injuries and things like that and would have blindness. So it was not unusual for people to be blind, and also it was not unusual for blind people to hang around together. And here you got two guys doing that. So here you see two men who were desperate for their sight. Two blind men followed him, crying out, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." Now the first question you got to ask is, how are two blind men following him? How does that happen? I mean, two of them, so maybe they can help it. Neither one can see. So how do they know where he's going? And then he ducks out on them into a house. So here they are following him, and they are crying out. I mean Jesus is making this hard on them. And true faith is often a response to God making it hard. We want God to just immediately, boom, give me what I want, give me it easy. I don't want to pray more than once for this. Just make it happen. And then God makes us wait. God makes us work. God makes us trust. God makes us believe. And we say, God doesn't love me. Yeah, he does love you. He's weaning out. He's whittling out the ones who are just curious, who are just carnal in the way they're asking for things for their own selves. They're not willing to truly follow and to follow hard. In Jeremiah 29 it says, Seek me and find me when you search for me with all your heart. When's the last time you prayed with all your heart? Even Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount that we are to ask, but not just ask. We're to seek, but not just ask and seek. We're to knock. And to keep on knocking, keep on seeking, keep on asking. Because true faith will do that. true desire for what you're asking for, and not just, something to make you more comfortable in life, or just to just please you for whatever your desires are. People aren't going to work for those things. But if something really is important, like these two men had in their life, they're going to be following and crying and working hard. And they stayed after Jesus, and they called him, have mercy on us, Son of David. And Son of David is messianic. And here you have, the first time in Matthew, two blind guys are calling Jesus by this messianic title. They recognize him in his messianic sense as the King of Israel that's come, that's been predicted. Isaiah predicted when that Messiah would come, that he would open the eyes of the blind. If this is him, we got to get after him. We got to follow him. That's what they do. And they cried out, have mercy on us, Son of David. We live in an entitled society, and the church has an entitlement mentality in it, that God should do this. We deserve for God to do this. And if he doesn't do this, then God has let me down. God doesn't love me. I heard one pastor ask the question when somebody came up to him, and he asked the question, what do you really deserve? What do you deserve from God? Think about how you treat God. What do you deserve? If you treated other people in your life like you treat God, what would you expect from them? And these guys realized their only hope was not entitlement, but mercy. And we realize that that is all we have to offer to God, because it's only based on what God did for us through Christ that we can even approach him. So all we have to offer is mercy, but we pat ourselves on the back so much in church that we think we all got God just waiting to, I got to love on those people. They're so special. We forget it's all about mercy and about grace. It says, when he entered the house, the blind men came up to him, and Jesus said to them, and this is amazing, these two verses, do you believe that I'm able to do this? And they said, yes, Lord. So here he ducks out on them. It's hard enough to find him in the street. He ducks into a house. They follow him into the house, and they confront him there. And again, you've got, in a minute he's going to say, don't tell anybody about this. If he would have done it in the middle of the street, everybody would have seen. Everybody would have seen. And it was going to be a problem. Mark's gospel says that the crowds caused Jesus to have to leave Capernaum. And if he was trying not to just cause more fuel on the fire that was keeping him from being able to even do ministry and pushing the time frame a little bit quicker than it should have been. But here they come up to him, and he asks them this one question: do you believe that I am able to do this? Do you believe I'm able to do this? When you're praying a prayer, just pull out a little request and ask the question, do I believe God is able to do this? I know I want it. When it comes to my finances, my health, this relationship, this problem, do I believe that God is able to do this? You see, Jesus didn't respond to them until they got into the house, testing their willingness, their sincerity to be healed. And we need to press on with our prayers like that. And God sometimes uses obstacles to establish a true faith. One guy named D.A. Carson said this: pray until you pray. Pray until you pray. Don't just get there and think you're praying. Keep praying until you're really praying. Keep seeking until you're really, really seeking. Do you really believe that I'm able to do this? Have you arrived at that point that your confidence in me and my willingness to do this, do you really believe that this could happen? That's the requirement of a miracle, is that kind of faith. That's what it requires. Faith is belief, reliance, and trust. Without it, Hebrews 11 says it's impossible to please God. It says also, a few verses later, God's a rewarder of those who seek Him. So, things like religion, good works, race, like being an Israelite, none of those things are pleasing to God. Only faith, it says, is pleasing. And Jesus, when he asks him, he says, do you believe that I am able to do this? He pulls out that great little phrase, I am. Do you believe I am? The same wording that is used when he describes himself. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. Do you really believe who I am? Some people don't want to be healed. You could make a good living as a blind man because part of their culture, it was good to give. You could get a lot of points to give to somebody who was blind. And you have a lot of people who are not really willing to give up what they're depending on in life, their little idols and addictions and things like that. They don't necessarily want what God wants to do in their life. It would free them up to live a totally different life, but they've kind of got entrenched in surviving in the life they've got. There was a Cocaine Anonymous convention, if you can imagine that. One guy named Mike said he earned $250,000 a year as a salesman, and he had a wife and 3 children, and he was also a drug trafficker, and he said, I became my biggest customer. Another guy named Jay, who was a wealthy lawyer, had his own firm. He said, one time I came home and my wife had my children's birth certificates on the table, and she said, swear on these that you didn't use today. He said he swore on it, but he was lying. It was addiction. And a blind person might have an addiction to handouts. All you got to do is kind of wait by the roadside and just benefit from people's guilt and people's wanting to benefit themselves in their way to heaven and to give you handouts. Jesus touched their eyes, saying, it shall be done to you according to your faith. And their eyes were open. That's another phrase. It shall be done to you according to your faith. And we wonder why our life is like it is. Well, maybe it's being done to us according to our faith. Why am I not experiencing more dynamic Christian life? Because it's being done to you according to your faith. That is the faith level that you are exercising. You're not trusting God. You're kind of dependent on American culture and American way of doing things, and we can all get by and survive and live better than the rest of the world. But to really experience this dynamic walk with God, which is probably harder in our culture because of the crutches that are all around us, maybe it is being done because we don't have to exercise faith for the small things. But he touched their eyes. And it says their eyes were open. He touched them. Jesus had the power. He could walk by a hospital and say, everybody in that building, be healed. But that wasn't the way he did it. He went person to person to person to person and touched them. And then look at this troubling thing, the end of 30 and 31. He didn't just warn them, he sternly warned them. Anybody else got a different word than sternly? What? Straightly. He warned them. See that no one knows about this. See that no one knows. And then it says in verse 31, they went out and spread the news to him all throughout the land. Imagine this great miraculous thing happening, and then God says, don't you tell anybody. That's my number one thing. My first command to you is don't tell anybody. You see, we can... What?
You got blind men walking around, seeing, talking to people and stuff.
Oh, Alan's getting ahead of me. Don't be thinking ahead. That's point number 2. Point number 1 is that often, and we see it in our culture, is we let the miracles become bigger than the message behind the miracle or the miracle worker. And, we have people that go out and they focus on that rather than, this is my book tour is what God did to heal me on this thing. And Jesus didn't want this miracle. He's already having a problem when he fed 5,000. They were clamoring to follow him. And then he started talking about discipleship, and off they went. So they were for the miracles, for the food. They were making a big thing about that. And then, how do you, as a blind person, healed? I mean, do you go out and buy dark glasses and a cane and just act like you're still blind? How do you hide that? Everybody who knew you saying, "Wait, weren't you blind? What are you looking at the sunset for? What has happened?" There's no way that they could have hid this like that. And he couldn't just slip back into the sighted community and not be noticed. But there are a lot of people that are very good at hiding their faith. Supposedly they've had a transform, change, new creation life, and they can hide it. Nobody's going to know about this. Nobody at work's going to know. Nobody at school's going to know. Jesus, this is my favorite verse in Scripture. Don't tell anybody. We seem to do it pretty well. And people go out and they have these dark lives and with the crutch of the world all around them, and they don't have this changed life detected by anybody. The blind men couldn't hide the change. How do we think we can hide a true change like that in our life? There's no way. It's difficult not to witness when you are so radically different. The world's going to ask you, what happened? It's only when we mimic the world and become these chameleons of who we used to be in order to protect ourselves. That's why I liked the baptism. They weren't ashamed of anybody on that beach. Whoa! They weren't trying to hide it. Why would we ever want to hide the most amazing thing that's ever happened to us? And how great is it when people demand an explanation for our lives? We're doing something right. They're doing something wrong when they don't. Well, you got these two guys who were desperate to see. Then you got one guy who was desperate to be free. Verse 32, as they were going out, a mute, demon-possessed man was brought to him. I guess he was next in line as these guys went out. And Jesus, here's this demon-possessed, this unclean spirit. And unclean spirits could produce muteness. They also, in Scripture, could, that's being deaf and dumb in this guy's situation. They also have the ability to cause all these other things as well as epilepsy-type things and suicidal things. That's all through Scripture, other kinds of fevers and problems. But they have the ability to restrict human functions when they are allowed access into a person, to make us mute. Is that an explanation for what we're seeing in America today, where we don't want to speak out for Christ? Demonic influences on us are muting us and keeping us from speaking out. We're not just hiding, that we're not able to articulate or form an argument for Christ, a defense for what's happened to us. Is that a demonic strategy? After the demon was cast out, the mute man spoke, and the crowds were amazed, saying, "Nothing like this has ever been seen in Israel." So the crowds are getting bigger and bigger, and people are getting, it's growing. They're getting more amazed, and they're excited, all except for a few. And there are a few who are desperate to stop what God is doing, because verse 34 starts with these three familiar words: but the Pharisees. All this is going on. It's amazing. But the Pharisees. They were saying, he cast out the demons by the rulers of the demons. They did not deny the miracles, but they tried to explain them away. Tried to spin them. Now, how horrible to walk up to the Grand Canyon and you say, what hole? I don't see a hole. To just deny the obvious. The Pharisees were experts at this. There's a Chinese proverb that says, "Man who say it cannot be done should not interrupt a man doing it." Why is he interrupting what Jesus is doing? Because it's obvious that God is working here. Only God could open the eyes of a blind man, as John 9 says. Well, Jesus was not, okay, the Pharisees are criticizing me, so I'm going to go home, go back to Nazareth, it hurt my feelings. No, verse 35 says that he just kept going. He was going through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming or preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. You know, Jesus was an example of what living for God's all about. And that is living for the pressing needs of all the hurting people around him. And he was making his way all around these populated areas of Galilee. He was teaching and preaching. You know, two very, very different things. Preaching is kind of proclaiming a message. I heard one guy describe it like, preaching is that locker room talk after you've done all the teaching to prepare the team. And then you just want to fire them up, send them out. But the teaching is when you are, now if you don't teach a football team, you can't fire them up at any level to make them effective out there on the field. If you haven't taught them the fundamentals and everything about the game and how to do your position, and here Jesus was doing both. But he was going all throughout Galilee, and Josephus says that there were 200 cities and villages in the region, and the region was 40 by 70 miles. And this is what Josephus said, this is his quote: "The cities are numerous, and the multitudes of villages are everywhere, crowded with men, owing to the fertility of the soil, so that the smallest of them contain about 15,000 inhabitants." And Josephus estimated 3 million people in the area. But Jesus was going. He didn't wait for people to come to him. He didn't find, I'm going to build a church, I'm going to build a building, and everybody wants to come to the building. He was going all throughout Galilee. And that's why he told us, go therefore, make disciples, baptize, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you. Lo, I'll be with you when you're doing that, because that's what he did. He went everywhere. He went to Africa, Kenya, Philippines, Brazil. He went to everywhere around the world. Teaching and preaching as God led him. He didn't wait for people to come to him. But in the midst of those needs, there was one thing that was really impacting Jesus. Verse 36 says, seeing the people, he felt compassion. He felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. It really bugged him that their religious leaders were leading them astray. That their religious leaders were not the shepherds like he was in teaching and preaching them, but really fleecing the flock for whatever good thing they could get out of it. But this word compassion, it means to be really moved inwardly. And another place, it's a different word, and that's in Romans 8. And in Romans 8, it says, who can separate us from the same word, compassion of God? It's love there, but it's the same word. Who can separate us? He gives this long list of things that cannot separate us from God's compassion. God doesn't just, you think of love in one way, but compassion. God is really passionate for you. He's really on fire for you. He doesn't just love you. We got people we love, but, we kind of avoid them maybe. I don't know. But we love them. He is really on your team. And nothing can separate from that. And that's the word here. Jesus felt compassion for these people. Where are the shepherds? Where are those who are like David, leading them to fresh water, to green pastures, protecting them? They don't have that because the religious leaders are taking advantage of them and putting bigger burdens on them. More burdens than they are willing to take upon themselves. And then Jesus turns to his disciples, and in that context, he gives them these two famous verses. These people are not having their needs met. He's going everywhere. He's seeing the same thing. The shepherds aren't taking care of them. So he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore pray or beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into his harvest. So, surrounded by all this great need, he said, pray. Pray for those who are willing to go to wherever God would call them and do whatever God would ask. Pray for people like that, who are not going to put any limits, any restrictions on God. God can't demand too much. He can't send them where they aren't willing to go, and let them know it's harvest time. And that the harvest is huge. The harvest is huge, and there just aren't any workers that are out there. And Jesus has changed the metaphors from sheep to wheat. It's a harvest that's out there in the field, and the idea is that it's overripe, it's ready, it's wasting away. Go out and get it. We need people to go out and bring in the harvest so it doesn't rot in the fields. And the tool for the harvest is now here. It's the gospel. We have the gospel. The gospel was there. That's the tool of bringing in the harvest. So the harvest now had the tool, the reaper, to go out and to be able to reap in the harvest, because now you had what the harvest was waiting for, which was the gospel. And you need people to understand that. We try to harvest with everything but the gospel and wonder why we end up with a basket full of tares. We're going to bring in a harvest with all these different carnal things to fill up a building, and we wonder why we got a building full of tares. People who aren't anything like a worker who's willing to go anywhere, do anything. It's all about them. Because you went out with the wrong tool. And you brought in tares instead of wheat. In Matthew 13, Jesus gives a parable of tares among wheat, and he talks about the field as the world, and the good seeds, the sons of the kingdom, but the tares are the sons of the wicked one. Let them both grow together until the harvest, and at that time of the harvest I will say to the reapers, first gather together the tares, bind them in bundles and burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. It makes a difference whether you're a wheat or a tare. And the only way to transform the harvest into wheat and not tares is the gospel, the tool that we're given. And to go out and be willing to do whatever, wherever, and however God calls us to do it. That's what Jesus says a moment like this needs. People like that. Not people to populate pews, but people who are willing to do whatever God calls them to do. And there's a high cost when we don't do that. Let me close with Rose Crawford. She was blind for 50 years. She finally got an operation, and she could see everything now, beautiful colors, everything. The doctor said she could have got this 20 years ago. This operation was available to her 20 years before she finally got it. And you kind of ask some questions. You know, why did she continue to assume that her situation was hopeless when it wasn't? Why had no one told her of the marvelous surgery that was available to her for 20 years? And what about the plight of those who are not told about the gospel? They spend decades on this earth, blind. When the touch of Christ that the gospel would guide them to could immediately set them free. And yet they're like Rose Crawford. They spend years and years, and maybe when they're 70 years old, they finally get saved. And they look back, and what's the first thing a 70-year-old thinks when they get saved? Why did I waste 70 years? Why did I waste so long? We have the tool. We have the call. And the call is to be a certain type of person that can bring in a harvest. And then what Jesus was going to say later, go therefore into all the world. And to bring that harvest in.